All right, what a day, huh? Got the tariffs, all this discussion about manufacturing, imports, exports. The Trump tariffs were announced yesterday afternoon. Of course, the stock market peaked today. It also triggered a lot of good discussion, I think, on manufacturing in the United States, and I want to talk about that. I have invested millions of dollars in manufacturing in the United States. I bought two companies. One was a HVAC manufacturer, commercial HVAC equipment, who sourced a significant amount of parts from China. Another one is this company, Total Shield, that manufactures ballistic and explosive shielding mainly for aerospace and space companies, manufactured all in the United States with all United States suppliers. I've seen both sides of, a developing country's manufacturing and the United States capabilities to manufacture. The first point I want to make is if the idea is that we want to reshore a lot of manufacturing by jacking up tariffs, I don't think it will work largely. And I think even if you were to quadruple the tariffs from whatever was announced yesterday, a lot of those goods are still going to be cheaper to make in other places than the United States. This is coming from a super patriot who's invested millions of dollars, who's lost millions of dollars in my first company in trying to manufacture in the United States. I want to do it, okay? I just want to also be realistic about the challenges associated with that. We have major cost disadvantages in manufacturing from a few different areas. Everyone knows about the labor differential, okay? I don't even need to get into the fact that I can hire an associate engineer in China for $25K a year, and that same person's costs $70,000 in the United States, right? I mean, we know that, right? There's a labor advantage and labor cost advantage. But there's all these other factors. There's regulatory. I had a friend who wanted to put a metal foundry in an industrial park. They said, no, we're not going to approve the zoning. The local town said, we'd rather have a brewery go in there. A brewery, right? That's not manufacturing, but there's a lot of people that don't want this stuff in their backyard, NIMBYs. The regulatory is slow and expensive and painful. Power availability, cost of power, disadvantaged compared to a lot of other countries. But the main thing is the supply chain. And I'm going to give you one example. I took parts to every supplier I could find in the United States and said, can you make this? And they said no. They would say that geometry looks complicated. We could do simpler geometry. We're not really set up for that. We only do, very large runs of things, and you wouldn't come anywhere close to our minimums. All these different reasons, right? We don't know how to do that. We just don't know how. Then I could fly to Shenzhen, an industrial zone in China, and I could find entire city blocks just dedicated to doing that one process or that one material. Oh, you want copper windings? Let's go to where all the copper factories are. Go from this place to this place to this place on the same street, show them a sample, and they would say, yes, we can make that, and here's a quote, give me this many days for a sample. Why? Because they've got this entire other supply chain around them, right? The screw guys right down the road, they could get a welder to cut, that kind of critical mass of manufacturing takes decades to build. China didn't do that in just a couple years. Turning these tariffs on isn't going to result in this just wave a magic wand and factories suddenly appear in a couple years here in the United States. China was accepted to the WTO in 2001. So that's almost 25 years ago. They've been slowly building up this capability, right? It takes a lot of time to get this capability and get these people trained and get the skill set and get the factory equipment in place. You see where I'm going with this? So the idea that we can kind of turn a dial and say tariffs go up, manufacturing comes in, okay, if we're committed to holding those tariffs for decades, yeah, absolutely. What are the chances, though, that we're actually going to commit to a strategy like that? In my opinion, the chances are low. So people in the comments today said, oh, you don't get it, Adam. You use automation, like you eliminate their labor advantage, and we have, this new tech. For one, that's really naive. You need people in these places that know what they're doing, even if you have a lot of automation. And by the way, the automation is coming from Japan. It's coming from Germany. We just slapped a 34% tariff on Japan. You want to buy those Fanuc, robots that automatically weld and do all this amazing stuff. Those are $1 million pieces of equipment coming from Japan, and we just slapped a 34% tariff on them. So I think then there's a ton of comments from people saying we shouldn't be buying all that cheap crap from China anyways. They make a bunch of cheap stuff, and we should be paying for craftsmanship, and maybe we don't need that cheap plastic junk. That's a bunch of comments like that. I'm willing to pay more for made in the U.S. stuff. The problem with that is, for one, people say one thing and do another thing when it comes to their buying habits. They do not, when it comes down to it, look for country of origin when they're walking down the aisle at Target or they're shopping on Amazon. They want the cheapest plastic spatula they can find. And, I gave an example of working in a factory in China temporarily. I was doing stuff for my company, but I was on the 4th floor of a company that was making curtain rods on the 1st floor out of plastic and aluminum. And people are saying, well, those curtain rods probably suck, and we should be buying curtain rods that last generations and not those cheap throwaway curtain rods. Well, you could do that now. Go hire a metalsmith from Germany to make your heirloom curtain rods that will last for generations and be beautiful, and go ahead and plunk down 10 grand for those curtain rods. Nobody's stopping you from doing that now. But the thing is, you don't do it. Hardly anyone does it. You look on Amazon and you say, man, I can get that curtain rod for $10. Like, I'm buying it. So there's a lot of what I consider to be grandstanding about this. And I'm a super patriot. I want to do everything in the United States. I want us to make everything that we possibly can. But when it comes to that curtain rod, I don't think we'll ever make it at a price point that would make it competitive with developing countries and their industrial cost advantages. And I'm not talking just China. We're talking India. We're talking Vietnam. We're a bunch of countries that are able to produce this stuff at a cheaper price than we could, even with very, very, very high tariffs. So, there was also some comments about, well, China uses slave labor, and those people that you described working in that factory, this factory had a dorm attached to it, and people would work here, and then they'd walk across the hallway, and they would live in these it was like a college dorm, and these are people that come from grinding poverty in a rural village somewhere in China. They get something like an internal passport that allows them to get on the train and go work at this factory. They go back home during holiday seasons, and they live in the dorm while they're working there. Conditions, look, it's not what a lot of Americans would do. It's by no means slave labor. And I'm not defending the China system, but what I am saying is, if you talk to those folks, they would say, this is such a better opportunity than what I came from. Please don't take this from me. This is what I'm doing to better myself. A bunch of people said, well, we should insist that all those other countries have the same labor and environmental standards as the United States or Europe. You know what? That is so naive and elitist to say. The way you do that is not by just saying, be like us, because they'd say, you're rich. We're not like you. We can't do that. The way you do that is by continuing to trade with that party. They eventually become wealthy. wealthier, and they get better and better and better living conditions. It happened in the United States. In my native Virginia, we had kids working in coal mines. They did not go to school. They worked in coal mines, and it was crushingly difficult. And we eventually became a wealthier country, and we said, we're not doing that anymore. And by the way, people are typing this message on their iPhone, and we don't even want to get into, where the rare earth metals came from in the Congo or whatever, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, I want to live in a world where everyone is rich and everyone has abundance. It's not this world, though. I'm sorry. And I think it's very childish to just say, well, we should do this. And at the same time, you're driving a car and using a phone and all your home furnishings, and you're the beneficiary of this global trade process. The global trade process over time will lift all countries out of poverty. It takes time, though. All right, stay on topic here. This is already too freaking long. So what would I do differently with these tariffs? So, if we're dedicated to doing things in the United States that, for example, are high value, military applicable, we absolutely should talk about a beneficial tax policy for attracting those companies. There's all sorts of things we can do. Saying we want to make everything, as I said before, is not going to happen. The Nike shoes you're wearing, even with a lot of automation, even if you triple or quadruple the tariff on Vietnam, it's probably still cheaper to make those in Vietnam. I'm sorry. If the idea of the tariffs is purely a negotiation, like a lot of folks have said, okay, fine. But even if it is that, I think the negotiation is not really being handled in the most productive way. Here, I do like the concept of reciprocal tariffs. It's easy for everyone to understand. The devil is in the details, though. There isn't just a tariff number that a country has, right? There's tariffs, different varying tariffs on every classification of goods. Agricultural items, dairy, including dairy, agricultural items, soybean, and all these different tariff rates. There's a bunch of tricky things that other countries do with a value-added tax, where you pay the value-added tax for everything, but then they get the manufacturers get a tax reimbursement if they're exporting it. So it's kind of a tariff as well. I think what we should do is have an exhaustive list of all the tariffs that are being applied to U.S. goods from all our different trading partners, as well as value-added tax and other border adjustment taxes and other things that affect the flow of goods between our countries. Publish that as a document. Then come in and say, in a month, we are going to match so come up with a composite score, say for agricultural items, multiply the tariff rate by the value of goods that are being imported, come up with some sort of composite score, and then say, we're going to apply the same composite tariff to your country in all these different categories, unless in a month's time you want to bring those down. And then that's what we'll publish, and we will automatically lower our tariffs or raise our tariffs from some future point onward to maintain parity. Or we could say we're going to match 75% of your tariffs or whatever. But I think time needs to be given to have other countries voluntarily reduce tariffs on our country, and I think the goal should be to increase the amount of trade with each one of those countries to give our exporters a better playing field, an even playing field, but not to say we're going to manufacture everything and want to export everything, because there's a lot of things that don't make sense for us to do. We have, for example, we're blessed in the United States with a giant, productive, fertile agricultural zone, and we export a lot of agricultural goods. If we import a lot of cheap curtain rods, then we should be saying, look, drop your tariffs on our agricultural goods and we'll drop the tariffs on your curtain rods, and that's comparative advantage, and that's the way the system should work. I think this was a pretty brute force attack. The markets obviously, puked today because they didn't like it. There's a lot of shock and awe. People have said, well, it's all negotiation anyways. I don't quite know anymore that it's negotiation. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think it's a somewhat ham-handed way to negotiate. Anyways, boy, a 15-minute video. I don't even know if I'll post this. I can keep going on and on and on about this. I think the main takeaway, if you bothered to listen this long, manufacturing is a great love of mine. Manufacturing in the United States is something I believe in. I want you to be realistic, though, about what we will and won't manufacture going forward, even with high tariff rates, even with automation. There are a lot of other factors that will go into making those manufactured goods economic or not. And this central planning process is not really the American way either. I think we need to remember that. I'm not against reciprocal tariffs. I just think we need to be very clear about what the tariff rate is, how we came up with it, and when and under what conditions we will lower those tariffs. We want to encourage fair trade, right? And so I think the message needs to be made much more clearly that these are being put in place with the ultimate goal of having free trade with our trading partners, or a fairer trade. All right. And my other message is, it's going to be okay. A lot of people are freaking out. We're going to figure this out. America always does. It's going to be okay. All right. Thanks.